The man I married as an Amish girl I had never spoken to. The first word he said to me was on our wedding night. The dress was the color of a winter sky just before snow. Not white. We don't wear white. I stood in my mother's bedroom, the small one, with the low ceiling and the single window that never quite closed, and I smoothed the fabric with both hands. It was November. The floor was cold through my stockings. Outside, I could hear my sisters moving through the house, the soft knock of wooden chairs, the smell of coffee and something baking. In a few hours, I would be someone's wife. I had never said his name out loud to his face. I'm Hannah. This is Plain and Left Behind, a space for stories that were never meant to be told out loud. If something here feels like something you've carried quietly, subscribe and stay. And tell me in the comments, did anyone prepare you for there is a particular kind of knowing that has nothing to do with words? I knew his name, of course. I had known it for years, the way you know the name of a hill you can see from your window. Present, familiar, never really examined. I knew which family he came from, which church district, which row he sat in on Sundays. I knew the color of his coat in winter, dark wool, third button slightly loose. I had noticed that button for 2 years before I ever noticed I had noticed it. That is the kind of knowing I mean. Quiet, peripheral, unsaid, or the thing that changed you most. The first time I truly saw him was at a singing. I was 17. The kind of evening that feels lit from inside. Lanterns on the tables, young people on both sides of the long room, the Ausbund open but no one really reading it. We sang the fast songs, the ones that made your chest feel wider. He was across the room. He had a way of holding still while everyone around him moved. I looked once, looked down, looked again. He did not look back, or if he did, I missed it. I carried that non-look home and turned it over for a week like a stone I'd found in the road. This is the part that is difficult to explain to someone who did not grow up the way I did. The Ordnung, the set of rules and understandings that shape Amish life, does not forbid noticing. It does not forbid feeling. What it asks for, very quietly, very firmly, is restraint. You do not speak to a young man you are not courting. You do not seek him out. You do not let your eyes stay too long. The discipline of it was so woven into me that I did not experience it as restriction. I experienced it as simply the shape of things, the way water takes the shape of whatever holds it. What I did not understand then, what no one told me, and what I am only now able to name, is that restraint practiced long enough begins to feel like incapacity. I did not know how to speak to him, not because the rules said no, but because I had never been taught how. There is a difference. I did not see it then. I want you to hold that difference carefully, because everything else in this story rests on it. The letter came in early September. Not from him. That is not how it worked. Word came through family, through the quiet machinery of community arrangement, that he had expressed interest. That the feeling, as far as anyone could tell, was mutual. A bundling night was set. For those who don't know, bundling was a form of supervised courtship practiced in some older Amish communities, where a young couple would spend a night in the same bed, fully clothed, a board sometimes between them, talking, getting to know each other in the only private space the community allowed. I lay awake 3 nights before it happened, trying to think of what I would say, but I said almost nothing. He said almost nothing. We lay in the dark. The room was his family's spare room, a thin quilt, a candle blown out, and outside a cow moved somewhere in the field, and I could hear his breathing, and he could hear mine, and that was most of it. I had prepared sentences. I had rehearsed small questions about farming, about his family, about nothing in particular. None of them came. The silence was not hostile. It was not cold. It was something stranger than either of those. It was 2 people who had been so thoroughly trained in restraint that even when the door was opened, neither of us could walk through it. The weeks passed. We saw each other at church. Once, carrying something heavy past the barn after a frolic, a community workday, he was close enough that I could have touched his sleeve. I didn't. He nodded. I nodded. My mother asked me later that evening how I felt about him. I told her I thought he was kind. She said, "He is a good man." That was the whole of my premarital counseling. 5 words. He is a good man. I turned them over the way I had turned over that first non-look, looking for something in them that might be enough to build a life on. The wedding was on a Thursday. We always married on Thursdays in November, when the harvest work was done. The ceremony was in High German, which I understood only partly. The bishop spoke for a long time. I stood very still. At some point, I became aware that my hands had stopped shaking, not because I was calm, but because I had gone somewhere just slightly past calm, into a kind of hollowed stillness. When it was over, people moved around us, and he came to stand beside me, and I waited. I do not know what I was waiting for, and he reached out and took my hand, gently, without looking at me. That was the first touch. His hand was warm. I had not expected that. The first word had still not come. The house was small, 2 rooms downstairs, a sleeping loft, a wood stove that had been lit earlier in the day by his mother, so that when we arrived, the warmth was already there, inherited, second-hand, someone else's preparation for a life they were handing off to us. The floors were bare wood, pale and clean. There was one window facing the field, and the moon was up, and the light it made on the floor was the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they mean something. I set down the bag I had carried from my mother's house. He set down his coat. We stood in that room together for the first time, not as neighbors, not as community members, as the only 2 people responsible for what happened next. I did not look at him directly. I looked at the wood stove. I looked at the window. I looked at the bag in my hand, and then at the floor, and then at the wall where someone had hung a small calendar, the kind with a Bible verse at the top, already 2 months old. He moved to the lamp on the table and adjusted the wick. The light steadied. I heard him set something down. His hat, I think, on the chair near the door. The sound was very small. Everything was very small. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I have told this story before, and I have been tempted to make it simpler than it was. It was not fear. It was something closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of a field you have never walked into, knowing that once you take the first step, the distance will become real. He turned around. I know that sounds like nothing. He turned around. But I had spent, I counted it once, later, nearly 3 years occasionally watching this person from across rooms and fields and church benches, and in all of that time I had never been the person he was turning toward. The full weight of his attention, when it arrived, was something I had not prepared for. He looked at me the way you look at something you are trying to understand rather than something you already know. And then he said it. "Are you all right?" 3 words, not 1. I had been so focused on a first word that 3 arrived and undid me completely that I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, not because crying would have been wrong, but because what I felt was not grief, not yet. It was something more like recognition. "Are you all right?" Spoken quietly, spoken toward me, spoken by someone who had also been standing in silence for years and had chosen, as his first act of private speech, to ask about me rather than tell me anything about himself. I have thought about those 3 words more times than I can count, more than any argument we ever had, more than any tenderness that came later. The first thing he said to me was a question. He wanted to know how I was. I did not know at the time how extraordinary that was that I said, "I think so," which was true and also not true, and also the most honest thing I had said in months. He nodded. He did not push further. We did not suddenly become fluent in each other that night. That is not how it works, and I will not tell you it is. What happened was smaller and more real than that. We sat near the wood stove for a while. He told me the names of the fields that belonged to the property, as if giving me the land's vocabulary was a way of giving me something to hold. I listened. I did not say much. Outside, the wind had picked up and the window rattled once, softly, and neither of us startled. That, I think, was the beginning that I knew a girl, I will call her Ruth, though that is not her name, who grew up 2 settlements over, whose wedding night held no such question. Her husband was not unkind. She has told me that clearly, more than once, the way people clarify things they need you to understand correctly. He was not unkind. But he also did not ask. He was 22 and had been handed a wife and a house and a life, and no one had taught him how to begin it any more than anyone had taught her. They lived together for 11 years in a silence that was not cruel, but was also never quite broken. She told me once, sitting in my kitchen with her hands around a cup of tea, "I don't think he ever knew my favorite color. I don't think he ever thought to wonder." She said it without bitterness. That was the saddest part. She had stopped expecting to be wondered about so long ago that the absence of it no longer registered as loss. If you have grown up inside a tradition that values yielding, Gelassenheit, the surrender of self to community and to God, you learn very early that your inner life is not the point. Your feelings are not the point. Your preferences, your fears, your particular way of seeing a moonlit floor or remembering a button on a coat, none of it is the point. The community is the point. The family is the point. The continuity of a way of life, handed down through generations of people who believed that smallness of self was closeness to God. I do not say this with contempt. I was shaped by it. I carry it still, the way you carry the accent of the place you were raised, even after you have left. It gave me things I am grateful for: stillness, patience, the ability to sit with silence without panicking. And it took from me things I did not know I had a right to keep. Both of those things are true. I need you to hold both of them. The community that did not prepare me for my wedding night also gave me a language for the sacred that I have never found anywhere else. The man who asked, "Are you all right?" in a quiet room in November, was also the man shaped by the same silence that had shaped me. Neither of us given the words, both of us reaching anyway. I have been gone from that life for a long time now. I still think about those 3 words more than he probably knows. If you are listening to this and something in it feels familiar, not the Amish part, but the silence part, the reaching part, the being handed a life and not quite knowing the language for it, then you already understand what I have spent years trying to say. Some silences are not empty. Some of them are just waiting for someone to ask first.